Hi, everyone. I wanted to hop on here real quick and answer some of the questions that I got in the week one discussion. Um, so, on to the first one that came up, or I should say the last one that came up. Someone asked what the process is when it comes to academic professionals or professors doing their research, and it really just depends on the approach they're using. It depends on what the aim of the study is, and the biggest factor when it comes to research is if they're dealing with humans in any capacity. So whether you're actually having humans come in and answer questions, or if you're asking them to participate in rigorous activity or eating things or any variety of things, if you have humans answering questions in any way, you have to go through the IRB, which is the Institutional Review Board. So you do a proposal like we're doing in this class, give as much information as possible. Sometimes you hear of instructors doing like pilot studies on their own that are not approved just yet, but they want to get an idea of what the research is going to look like. They can't use any of that information. They can reference it, but that can't get published anywhere if it's just like a pilot study, at least at the academic level. And once they have a general idea, they'll put this proposal together and then they'll send it to the IRB. IRB will review everything and then let them know if they can proceed with the study. A few things will determine how feasible or how easy it is to get through IRB, and it definitely also depends on the institution you're at, because every institution has their own review board that they have to go through. But if you are dealing with sensitive issues, if you're asking questions about sex or drug use or anything along those lines, you might get a lot more pushback, or you might get a lot more kind of constructive criticism in terms of changing questions or approaches and things like that. So that'll determine a lot in terms of how much you'll be able to get done or what you'll be able to get done. But good researchers can put together, even when they're dealing with sensitive subjects or even sensitive populations, like if you're dealing with like children or anything like that. If they do things, if they're smart, they'll know what to include, what not to include, to make sure that they're protecting that audience and protecting the participants, while also still answering whatever questions they're aiming to answer using their study. So once you get approval from the IRB, then you can go ahead and conduct your research. And then from there, you have to write everything up into a full paper. And then that's when you start submitting everything based on your findings. You start submitting it to peer-reviewed journals. And the way those work, which is kind of goes into answering the biggest question I got for week one, was how do you know what kind of research to trust? And when it comes to academic journal articles, I think that's why they're revered so much in terms of their reliability and their veracity, is because of the fact that they are peer-reviewed, blind peer-reviewed. So essentially you send it out to the journal and you have to take off all identifying factors. You take off the university, you take off your name, all of that. So they are just looking at the work that you're submitting, like the paper that you're submitting. That's all they're judging you by. And then however many people are on that peer review board, they will then determine if they are just going to outright accept your paper. Usually that's rare. Usually you'll get accept with revisions, and then you have to go back and forth with them. And honestly, you hear stories of folks who have gotten accepted with revisions, and the revisions take a very long time. And so from the moment they submit to the moment it actually gets published, it could take up to a year. So that's not even including the time it may have taken to conduct the actual research. So that's why, in terms of if you think about graduate school and doctoral programs and master's programs, when you have professors asking you to make sure that you're citing peer-reviewed journal articles, that's why they're so big on asking for that, because all the time, the effort, the oversight that's involved with those things, that's what makes those such a reliable resource when you're citing those in your own papers. Outside of that, especially based on the clip we saw of John Oliver in week one, I understand the hesitation to trust anything that's making claims. I think especially with all that's gone on with COVID, I think the fact that we have now reached a point where we politicize science, I think it has become difficult to have conversations without people jumping to assumptions and conclusions without really getting information. When you're dealing, at least on an academic level, when we're looking at, I do a lot of all my work is qualitative. And so I never really have to deal with human beings. My stuff and you'll see this in the video I have up for this week. And it's not me. I found some really great sources that really give a good job explaining the difference between quantitative and qualitative research. But I've done a lot of content analysis. I've done some ethnographies. That's more along the lines of what I'm doing. But when it comes to academic research, the whole point of the research is that you are gathering data, seeing what emerges from the data, and then reporting your results. And that's all that you can really do. There's a big difference when you're looking at things like that academically, even when you're doing interviews or when you're doing like, I'm sure a lot of you have been a part of like some survey where they ask you like, it's called a Likert scale, when it's like strongly disagree, neutral, agree, strongly agree, right? Some folks, even if they're getting stuff like that, they're seeing what emerges from that data, right? Like if you are identify as a male and you are in college athletics, what is the likelihood that you consume X amount of protein or, something along those lines. They might, hand out this survey to a bunch of college athletes. And then one of the questions is, I consume I start every morning with this amount of protein. And then you have them, strongly agree, that whole thing. And then they just see what emerges from the data. And that's what they report on, right? They may have a hypothesis. They might have some research questions that they're answering in their research study. And that's what they're doing. Right, that's kind of like the formula when you're looking at academic research articles, right? People are working from hypotheses or research questions or premises, like all of those number of things. And you'll see research studies where someone says, this is what I thought was going to happen, and this is not what happened at all. I apologize for the noise. That's my dog trying to get comfortable in her bed. I don't know what she's doing, but she's crazy. Now, when it comes to medical science, things get a little bit more tricky, especially when, like COVID, you're seeing situations where it's something that there's not a lot of information about, right? Where things, as you gather information, you have to change protocols. And I think that's where a lot of the confusion came from, where a lot of the mistrust that people started to have in science started to come up, because they said, well, first you said we don't need to wear masks, and now you're saying we do need to wear masks, and so on and so forth. But all of that comes, and as someone who's done research, you adapt. Like you make assumptions based on previous knowledge of what you think is going to happen. And then as you start learning more information, then you have to change it. Once you realize, okay, what I thought was going to happen isn't happening. So we need to course correct right now. I mean, it's the best analogy is if you think you're headed in a particular direction as you're driving somewhere because you've driven a particular way, you're just good in terms of like knowing your, north, south, east, west. And then all of a sudden there's some construction somewhere, or the road curves in a way that you didn't think it was going to curve, and now you're like, or there's traffic, you're like, okay, well, I can't just keep going this way, or I was wrong and think that this way was going to be faster. I need to course correct and figure out another way to go, right? Or other ways to kind of speed up my time. And that happens all the time when it comes to medicine, especially because there, and my condolences to anyone in the class that maybe has lost someone to COVID. But especially when you're dealing with a virus that manifests so differently with different people, where it affects young people differently, elderly people differently, people with pre-existing conditions, like all of those things change the knowledge that people previously had. I think a year and a half ago, there was little to no solid concrete information of what the long-term, even just, over a few weeks, let alone like the long-term ramifications of the virus was going to be. But you see that all the time, even on when you're not dealing with a pandemic, right? Like if you go to the doctor and they think you have a sinus infection, they're going to treat you for a sinus infection. And then after you finish those 10 days of your antibiotic, if things still aren't better, they're like, okay, we thought it was this, but now we're going to have to take another approach. So medical research, definitely in terms of like the IRB and things like that, there is a lot more care and consideration to take into account, especially when they're doing testing on human subjects, things like that. But that's the process, I would say, is look at... one of the good things to look at, for those who are asking, like how you find out what's good research, look who's funding it. That's a big one. I know years ago, like big tobacco was paying for studies to be done to prove that smoking doesn't cause cancer, isn't harmful to your body. I know also years ago, I think it was like some corn industry was paying I think when they were trying to go heart healthy, to prove that, like, we should get away from sugars and eat more carbohydrates or something along those lines. And also and I think the whole point of this course is look at the specifics of the study, right? I think we all have people in our lives, or maybe even ourselves, where we have this strong belief based on something that we heard that artificial sweeteners will cause cancer of some kind, right? Because based on the study, they saw that rats who consumed a certain amount of artificial sweeteners, I think it was bladder cancer is what they ended up getting, right? But if you looked at the study, I think I think rats have there was some sort of process that rats go through that humans don't have, where that risk isn't there. But even if it was, the equivalent to what the rats were getting in terms of artificial sweeteners would be like hundreds of diet sodas a day for a human being. So, I mean, is it possible that someone's drinking hundreds of sodas a day? I mean, potentially, but I think it's important to be able to look at these studies and recognize what are they actually saying and if there is an actual correlation. The problem is, especially now, is people really want their information quickly. They want it in an Instagram post. They want it in, 280 characters on Twitter. They want it really fast. They want it, in a 30-second clip or a 60-second clip or on a TikTok. And they don't take the time to look at who this person is, what their credentials are, or even something as basic. Like if someone sends me an article, one of the first things that I will do is click the homepage, because I want to see like what other material this organization is putting out. And I think that all of these things are good ways of trying to get out what or trying to understand what is good and bad versus bad information. And I think it's also helpful to be able to look at something and gather the important aspects from it, and being able to say, okay, like this is important, these are my big takeaways, but I can kind of leave some of this other stuff behind. So that's my suggestion to you all in terms of how to find out what good research looks like, or figuring out what you can trust. I think funding is a very big one, trying to figure out who is funding the research. And I think finding out what else they're putting out there. But in terms of, and I think I already have it up here. In fact, I'm going to just keep talking while I look this up. But on the homepage where I think I have some resources for you all, assignment resources. I have a video up, yes, called MLS Library Databases, where I show you how to access academic peer-reviewed journal articles. Those are good. Those are great. Like I said, those are the ones that actually go through the peer-reviewed process to get accepted into the journals. So I think that is a good place to start if you have some questions. So I think if right now, like, I think it would be a good idea, especially as we're getting ready for that mid-semester assignment, the analysis and discussion. I think it would behoove you to like get on there, sometime this week, and start just kind of getting an idea of what kind of research articles you want to look for, or which research article, I should say. You don't have to do multiple ones, just one. But get an idea of what those look like and what some of your takeaways could be, and kind of get used to that type of writing, because I think that's the biggest jump for me when I was going from undergrad to my master's, and then even more so going from my master's to my PhD, was the difference in writing level, the expectations, and to be honest, kind of like the pretentiousness that sometimes comes about with some academics. I try to make my writing as accessible as possible, but especially depending on which journal you're looking at, sometimes there's almost like this expectation, like you have to write a particular way. But anyway, I digress. So yeah, I hope I answer your questions. I'll be on the lookout and as we move forward on the discussion post, and try to hop on here and do these types of videos more often. So if you have any questions, once you're done with your discussion board, feel free to throw any questions out on there, and I will try to answer them in videos like that.